for the first 30 seconds of this video, here is the promise and the mystery that will keep you watching until the very end. Because this is not just the story of a classic arcade game, this is the story of how Street Fighter II secretly rewired competitive gaming changed. How players think, created modern esports before the word even existed, introduced mechanics that developers still copy today, and turned simple button presses into psychological warfare, all while looking like a colorful cartoon full of fireballs and flying kicks. And by the end of this video, you will never look at a fighting game, an arcade cabinet, or even a simple combo the same way again. Street Fighter II did not arrive quietly, politely, or gently asking for attention. Because when it hit arcades in the early 1990s, it landed like a digital thunderstorm that shocked players, terrified arcade owners, and completely reshaped what video games could be. Since before Street Fighter II, most fighting games were clumsy experiments where characters felt stiff, moves were unreliable, and victory often felt random. But suddenly, this one game appeared and made everything else feel outdated overnight. What made Street Fighter II so dangerous? So powerful. And so revolutionary was not just that it had better graphics or louder sounds, but that it introduced a feeling of control that players had never experienced before. Because for the first time, punches felt different from kicks. Light attacks felt different from heavy attacks, and skill actually mattered more than luck. Which meant that losing no longer felt unfair, but instead felt personal. Like the game was staring at you and saying you could have won if you were better. This single change alone transformed arcades into battlegrounds of pride, ego, and reputation. Because suddenly people were not just playing against the machine, but against each other, gathering behind cabinets, forming crowds, watching matches like sporting events, and quietly deciding who the strongest player in the room really was. Which is something that simply did not exist in gaming culture before Street Fighter II took over. Another reason Street Fighter II changed fighting games forever was its roster of characters. Because instead of giving players slightly different versions of the same fighter, the game introduced wildly distinct personalities, body types, speeds, strengths, and weaknesses. Meaning that choosing a character was no longer cosmetic, but strategic. And this single idea created the foundation for every character-based fighting game that followed, from Mortal Kombat to Tekken to Smash Bros. Ruin Ken taught the world about fundamentals and discipline. Chun-Li introduced speed and precision, Zangief turned patience into power, Dhalsim redefined space itself. And suddenly, players were not just learning a game, but mastering a philosophy. Because each character rewarded a different mindset, and this idea of playstyle diversity is now a core pillar of modern competitive gaming. Street Fighter II also secretly trained players to think several moves ahead because it introduced combos, not as a flashy gimmick, but as a reward for understanding timing, spacing, and opportunity, even though were technically a bug at first. A beautiful accident that Capcom wisely decided to embrace instead of remove, proving that sometimes the most important innovations are discovered by mistake and perfected by vision. These combos created a new language of play, where beginners mashed buttons and experts spoke fluently through perfectly timed inputs. And this invisible skill gap kept players coming back again and again. Because every loss felt like a lesson rather than a dead end, which is one of the reasons Street Fighter II became so addictive without ever needing to explain itself. Then there is the arcadey economy, an uncomfortable but fascinating truth because Street Fighter 2 was carefully designed to be challenging in a way that encouraged improvement while still ensuring the players lost just often enough to keep feeding quarters into the machine. Effectively turning frustration into motivation and motivation into profit, which might sound manipulative but also pushed players to become better faster than ever before. Bus characters like M. Bison felt unfair, aggressive, and almost cruel, but they existed to test not just but emotional control because the game was teaching players how to stay calm under pressure long. Before sports psychology became a common concept, making Street Fighter II a mental training ground disguised as entertainment. Another massive reason Street Fighter II changed everything was its impact outside the arcade. Because once it came to home consoles, it proved that competitive multiplayer experiences could thrive in living rooms, sparking rivalries between friends, siblings, and neighbors, and turning couches into training grounds where bragging rights were earned through skill rather than luck. This transition helped legitimize gaming as a shared social experience rather than a solitary hobby, paving the way for local multiplayer culture, tournaments, and eventually global online competition. meaning that Street Fighter II did not just change fighting games but helped create the social foundation of modern gaming itself. The influence of Street Fighter II can still be felt today in everything from health bars and special meters to frame data and mind games, because it taught developers that players enjoy learning complex systems as long as those systems feel fair, responsive, and rewarding. A lesson that countless games have tried to replicate, but few have truly mastered. What makes all of this even more impressive is that Street Fighter II achieved legendary status without tutorials, without patches, and without online guides, meaning players had to learn through observation, experimentation, and word of mouth, which created a culture of shared discovery that feels almost mythical by today's standards. In many ways, Street Fighter II did not just create a genre, but created a mindset. One where mastery is earned, respect is displayed silently through skill, and improvement is always possible, which is why decades later players are still analyzing, competing, and arguing about a game that could have easily been forgotten if it were not built on such a strong foundation by changing how characters work, how players think, how competition feels, and how games reward dedication. Street Fighter II permanently altered the DNA of fighting games and competitive gaming as a whole, proving that a well-designed system can outlive technology, trends, and even generations of players. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into why Street Fighter II changed fighting games forever, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more legendary gaming stories. Leave a comment sharing your favorite Street Fighter memory or character, and share this video with anyone who loves classic games, arcade history, or wants to understand how one game managed to punch, kick, and combo its way into gaming immortality.